All right, so let's start by just talking Powtoon a little bit. Aside from questions that people have already asked me, what else? What other questions do you have? What issues have you run into? Anything that we can address at this point so that we can kind of set aside Powtoon and walk away for a while?
So, I had no experience with college. I think for me, it took some time for me to play around with it a little bit. If I wanted to bring my own soundtrack in there, I had to go into iMovie, convert, and then export it back, and I wasn't aware of that. So it took me a lot more time to get that done because I had to convert and bring it in.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then one thing that I noticed, like when I wanted to add my voiceover and the audio, like there's no way of explaining how to just say you want that audio and that voiceover for that one slide. So I had to go in, unclick it, then go back and click it to get that to convert the way I wanted. So it took me,
Okay.
what it could have took me 20 minutes, it took me an hour to figure it out. And I think I had to go in and make some error, go back, redid the whole project over, went back in again for me
Gotcha.
to figure out how to do that. So it was a pain.
But mainly revolving around the audio track aspect
Yeah,
of it, of getting
it
the
was
audio in there.
very difficult.
I had
Okay.
the same problem because I did the voiceover and then I wanted to add music to like add the musical element
Gotcha.
just to like the beginning to kind of like
And then-
the first time it kept playing on a loop.
Yeah.
The whole thing. So like
Yeah. So that is.
and then I ran out of time to try to Google it. So
Yeah, that I do remember briefly going over that, and maybe I just needed to point it out more. But the way that Powtoon works with the soundtrack, the music as opposed to the voiceovers, is that whatever you put in there, it will just loop it for the length of your project. You have no way of telling it just play this thing once and then stop. It does the reverse. If the music's too long, it just chops it off at the end of your thing. So the only way around that is to, even though they call it the voiceover per slide, is you can. It doesn't have to be voice. It could be music, and you could upload that just for that slide. Or if you're doing a voiceover and music, you would have to probably build that in another program like GarageBand or iMovie or
So
Audacity.
can you add another voiceover on top of the existing voiceover?
You can only have one. There's only one per slide voiceover track. So
Because I did mine as like for the entire. I did one continuous.
right, which you can do. So
Not
that's a
per
good question.
slide.
I don't know.
You have to, as I told you, you have to go in, click it, unclick it, and then go back in and click it, and then it has a little pop-up where it said if you wanted to do it for the entire Powtoon or this current slide.
Gotcha.
But I had to like, in trial and error, like I had to go in, redo it over, and go back in for
Yeah.
me to figure it out. It was hard.
What I'm not sure is if in Powtoon, so you've got basically the three audio tracks. You have the music track, you've got the full Powtoon voiceover, and then you've got the per slide Powtoon voiceover. What I'm actually not sure of, because I've never tried it, is whether you can have something in the voiceover for the full Powtoon and have something in the per slide as well.
You could add music.
Because then this one could be your music and this one would be your voiceover, but then you'd have to be doing a full. Yeah. So like I said, the only other way I could think to do it would be take your first slide and the script for the first slide and the music for the first slide and use a program like Audacity or something and build it as one audio file that's got the voice and the music already built into it. And then you would have to bring that in.
You're gonna
But
give
then
us
that gets-
another like 2 weeks because that's how long it would probably take me to figure that out.
Yeah, no, but if that's what you're trying to achieve, because it is one limitation. The audio side of Powtoon is really limited to those three things, and they're either on or off, and you can set the volumes for them, and that's about it. So maybe eventually they'll have the option of saying just play the music and stop instead of keeping looping it.
Yeah,
But
I
at the
thought it was
moment,
gonna be like one of those little adjustable bars that you could.
yeah, like shorten it up and say, yeah, they they don't really timeline the audio component of it like they do all of the video, the visual components of it. It would be nice, but
Sure
it'll
it'll be
be
in an update or something.
yeah.
I've been hearing more and more commercials for like Powtoon on the radio, so I'm sure they're getting more mainstream.
It looks it's popped up in a couple of weird places for me
Yeah.
too recently. Where I'm like,
being splayed on them.
oh, that could be the,
Do you have the conversion of it?
of Powtoon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm assuming maybe because we're using not the profile version, maybe you can check. and
no,
see.
well, the educate when you have an educational license like I do, that gives you all of the pro content. So I
Will
don't.
we have it though?
Yes, if you're in my class, if you're registered through my account, it should give you unlimited access to everything Powtoon has to offer. The only thing you can't remove is the watermark. You do have to pay other money to get the watermark removed.
Want their brand on.
Or go in there and paste a sticky note over it or something like that.
So can you add sound to just a couple slides, like at the beginning and then stop? Or that's
That,
like
the,
the music thing?
yeah, like I said, the only way I could see doing that would be to,
Like play
to
it
put it,
while like this, for the voiceover in front of the.
you could do that, or if it is something you have as an audio file, if it's an MP3 or something, you could upload that just like you would if you had recorded your voice somewhere else. Because you can bring outside audio files in.
And images
So
too.
yeah, and just like you can with images and movies. So if you had, like I know in GarageBand / iMovie, they give you all of those little pre-built jingle things that are like 10 seconds long, 5, 10, 15 seconds long that are in different styles. Is with an audio file like that, you should be able to bring that into Powtoon. Because Powtoon doesn't know that there's not somebody talking. It calls it a voiceover, but it's just audio. So that voiceover could be an audio clip. If you want voiceover as well, just on the slide, that's where you would have to kind of pre-build the two together and bring that whole thing into the slide. So there are workarounds, but yeah, they do start to get into using other programs and kind of getting creative with things. All right. Next. If I should say this is not an excuse, just an explanation. If I'm a little punchy tonight, I've been at school till 10 o'clock every night since last Friday. Because
Good
this
thing you
is,
don't have a family or anything.
I do. They haven't seen
Irony
me
in real
since,
life, bro.
I think my wife on Saturday or Friday said, so when do we see you for dinner next? And I said, I think it's next Thursday. So this is the week of our school musical, which I'm kind of directly involved with, but because of cancellations and weather things and all, their whole tech schedule got pushed back. So I'm a little crunchy tonight, let's say. All right, so the one thing I did want to just look at quickly, because I know there were a couple of questions that people had brought up, was the whole issue of getting the what am I trying to say? The finished Powtoons out of. Yeah, here we go. Nope. Yeah, here we go. See? I think I went through this before. No. Try one more thing.
Sad it's happening to you, but I'm glad I'm not doing it.
Logging from your Google account? Because that's happening.
No, I have because I'm through the school, I have a separate log in.
Yeah, everything's done. I deal with that.
What would I have
When
done?
we were on my winter break, I went to Melissa and I was like, I have to have my phone on before I start school again.
Oh, there we go.
or I'll lose my mind.
I love these. And then I started second guessing myself. Is there a crosswalk in that picture? What do they consider stairs? Oh, what?
Whatever. Yeah, but she's like, I'm sorry, I cannot do. Tracy hasn't had it. But you wanna know why? Because they did. I think they always used to do the high school first, like all department heads. Yeah. I don't know if they decided to be a little bit more fair and do the middle school first this year. Now all high school together. But it sucks to have it late because you have your observation stuff and then also you make your data, you make your paperwork. So it's like you're getting double whack. You're getting picked twice. Yeah. Last year she kept postponing.
Yeah, if it's more comfortable, you could, like, yeah, just so you're not.
They get docked for that.
All right, sorry, just give me 1 second here. This is.
Oh yeah. Well, I just my informal. She came in, and it was weird because she's a sophomore AP, but 3 out of my 5 classes was here, so I didn't know if it was gonna be her or Allison. My informal. So I had my informal. And so I saw Allison in the hallway. She's the AP right there. And I just said, oh, just out of curiosity, have you looked at everything? And she goes, no, you're not on my list. And I was like, oh, I didn't know because I'm a majority of senior teacher. My email. So she must have said something to Michelle because Michelle literally came in the next morning, 8 periods. Oh, Melissa was asking when her informal was gonna be.
That's yay.
It was fun. I would rather have back than this one big dog and pony show.
All right, so sorry, I'm back. I was using the wrong email. So, okay, so in terms of getting files out of Powtoons, Powtoons is primarily geared towards hosting your finished products online in some way. So they have connectors that you can set up between Powtoons and YouTube. They have connectors you can set up between Powtoons and a lot of the other hosting services. I think Vimeo, maybe Facebook, some other sorts of things. YouTube. You can also, they set up like your own Powtoon video page, which would be like having a channel on YouTube where you can have all of your videos, so somebody could go to that page and see all the videos you've created. One of the weirdnesses that I discovered about Powtoons is that they have 2 terms that they use, and one of them is export, and one of them is publish. When you are building a project for the first time, if you have not viewed the project yet, the first thing it always does is export the project. So when you're in the project itself, actually, let me start a new one because these have all been, let's grab one of these here. Loading awesomeness. So when you've got the project for the first time and you've been working on it, the button up in the top right-hand corner, first time will say Preview and Export. So what exporting does is take you to here. I don't care about that. So that you can preview it and make sure everything's doing what it's supposed to. And your first option then is to export it from here. So at this point, it's going to give you options to upload, which means it's going to put it somewhere online, or download, which means it's going to prep it so that you can bring it onto your computer as a separate file. So here are those connectors: Facebook, YouTube. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Go back to that. Yeah, I'll stay away from that. So, and for each of them, if you want to put it on YouTube, it's going to ask you for your login information for your YouTube account so it can access it. Or this is that create your personal Powtoon player page. So if you don't want to go to an external place, but you want to have these videos available online, that's Powtoon's version of setting up a channel in YouTube for you. So you can create it that way too. The download options, I've never done it as a PDF or a PowerPoint, so I'm not sure exactly how those will translate. PowerPoint, I imagine it just turns each of your slides into a PowerPoint slide, but I'm not sure if all the animation will track or not. The MP4, that's as a standalone video. So if you're going to be putting the finished video on, say, a Moodle, for those of you that have been doing the Moodle class, or on your school website, if you have a page at school and you want to put this video on your website, then you probably want to have the actual file so that you can put the file right in the web page. All of these others, for somebody to view it, they're going to be going to that website in order to see it. Or you would, if you say put it on YouTube, you could grab the embedding code and pull that back to your website and then embed it, but that just seems like a couple of extra steps that don't need to be there. So, yeah.
If you go with the MP4, you don't need to embed it, you just put it right on your page and it's fine.
You can, yeah. I mean, certain things may have a size limit. So if your finished Powtoon is 1.7 gigs big, then your school servers may say, sorry, we can't host things that big. But if, as long as where you're putting it, but if it's a standalone file, that's just like putting any other file onto a web page. So you should be able to just load it from there. So, so in terms, for those of you that were asking how to get the right URL so that I could see the file, it kind of just depends on what you have available to you. If you're a YouTube user, and I know a couple people said this was the route they went, you can upload it to YouTube, and then you just go to that page on your YouTube site, copy the URL, and then give that URL to me. When I click on it, it'll take me to YouTube, and I'll be able to watch it from there. Or if you want to keep it in Powtoon and go to your personal site, yeah, so category, I'm just going to do this. So what it's done now is this movie is now on a Powtoons page that allows people to come to this page and see it. So in that case, you can grab they've got all of the different sharing things here, so you can grab the link for the page or email the link to somebody or so on. So this is kind of like their version of the YouTube player page. People can comment if you've gotten the ability to comment, and so on. So that is now sitting on a Powtoon page, so that would be another place that you could go and grab this URL or grab the link, and you could copy and paste that in as well. So that would be another way to get the file to me. For this project, the files are probably too big for you to just email to me, because that would be another thing, would be to download the MP4 and try to email that file. But my guess is that the files are going to be way too big for that. So I would say one of those two options. YouTube, I know a lot of people use YouTube, so it's familiar to a lot of people. If you've got a YouTube account, that might be the easiest way to go. Or just publish it right here to the Powtoon page and grab that file. All right. Somebody asked then, once it's published, can you still edit it? And the answer is yes. So you'll notice here, even though it says your Powtoon's been published and is ready to share with the world, it still gives me the option here to edit the Powtoon.
Do you have to reshare it, or is it like a Google thing where it automatically updates it?
I think you have to That's a good question. I should double check that.
YouTube, you would think like that.
You have to put the file back on. Yeah. So yeah. I don't know if you're staying inside Powtoon because they're working off their own server, but I think you would still have to publish it, because if you're making changes, you don't want those changes to be what people see until you've decided you've finished the changes.
Will that change the URL?
I think the URL will stay for a given video. I think because it's treating it like a YouTube page. So I think probably this weirdness in here, the FUVAZL, that's probably Powtoon's identifier for this video. So even if I go and edit it and then republish it, it should still be on that. Because otherwise you'd have to be going in and updating links if you're using them in other places and things
So
like
you're
that.
saying if we typed it in with that link up there, go back and edit it now, you'll get the edited version?
No.
As long as
I do
you
that.
make sure to export or publish it when you're done editing. I won't automatically see the changes. So if right now I went and hit edit Powtoon and took it back into the editor and I made some changes to it, those changes won't be visible to the outside world
You have to redo it.
until you republish it. So, and what that does is that if you don't make all the changes, you do a little now and you want to come back later, it means people won't be looking at the partially re-edited version. Like you get to decide when you've done the changes you need to do.
That makes sense.
So it would keep saving it just as an internal project. Yeah, so it's the difference between saved and unsaved, which just means Powtoon knows what you've done to it. But then when you hit the publish, it'll take you back to this. You can view it, you publish it, and then again it'll say update. So in that case, let's see if it's the same FUVAZLRH, the same one it was before. So so you just republish it. And then at that point it's locked in those changes. All right, so is that helpful for the people that had the questions about exporting? Yeah, and the key is, and somebody else was asking, I can, because you're in my Powtoons class, I can actually just go in and find your project through the classroom and look at it that way. So if you had issues with this end of it, I can still go to your project. If the link that you put in your Word document doesn't work out for me or goes somewhere weird, I can just go into your account and find the project and look at it that way too. But I just wanted to kind of make sure you had gone through the process at least once of getting the Powtoon out of the workspace and into the public space. All right, other questions about that part of the process? And I do apologize, that's one piece that I intended to go over in one of the weeks of classes that we got interrupted and so on. So what I'll say is, I know tonight is when the due date was for the Powtoon. If your work is mainly done, but you were one of the people struggling with getting this or getting the final thing into the Word document and getting it to me, just finish it up over the next couple of days, and that's fine. You don't have to use the extension on it or whatever. Just since I hadn't had a chance to go over this piece of it with you yet. All right. Anything else related to Powtoon? Because at this point, my wife is getting really sick of me saying the word Powtoon, and she never wants to hear it again. So, all right. So, let me go back to here. I guess I should also just ask any other questions. I know we've mainly been focused on Powtoon to date, although hopefully as of now, we can kind of set that aside and really turn our attention to games and gamification and the group work and all of that. But is there anything else from previous week's work or assignments or anything along those lines? Okay, that's fine. All right, so let us turn our attention. So one of the things that I've done, just for everyone's information, is on our Moodle, I have moved that wiki space for the group game work. I've put a link to it right here at the top of the page. I didn't want to move it out of week 4 or 5 or wherever it was because it's kind of anchored there. But if you don't want to go through the weeks and try to remember where that information is, I put it right here at the top. That's where a lot of the sort of written work related to your game is going to go. So we're going to be going to that page a lot. That's where you were working last week in your groups to throw out the ideas for games and then have a little discussion about them and so on. Tonight, we're going to be starting to build the instructional design part of it. And I've added pages to each group's wiki where you'll be starting to answer some questions about what the instructional goals are for the game that you're trying to create and so on. So I just wanted to point out that that's now there, and we will be going there a lot, which is why I wanted to put it right at the top of the page. So let's start then with this question of what is a game? It's one of those questions I think that everybody's immediate response is, I know what a game is. And then the minute you start trying to nail them down on what they actually mean by saying they know what a game is, it gets harder and harder to figure out what it actually is that makes a game a game. There's a lot of, just in searching around and doing some of my own research for this class, there are entire doctoral theses out there that just are addressing the whole question of sort of what makes a game, and there's even different approaches to how you would define what a game is. Like not even what the game is, but just the very way, sort of the meta way that you decide what to define a game as. So what I was looking for, what I wanted to start with was, I was looking for something that was pretty straightforward, not very long, that seemed still functional enough to kind of cover the important bases of what makes a game a game. So here is where I ended up, is this sentence right here, which is a system of rules in which agents compete by making ambiguous decisions. Right? A system of rules in which agents compete by making ambiguous decisions. So what does that mean? There's kind of three things here, right? There's the system of rules, there's the competing agents, and there's the ambiguous decisions. So let's just maybe start by just pulling those three apart and seeing if we agree with each of those three parts or have additional things we want to say. So what about the system of rules part? This is maybe the most straightforward, but
I think every game has some sort of
Way to play
things you
it,
have to
like,
follow.
yeah.
Right?
You
You
have
know,
to have, yeah,
we know what rules are.
guidelines.
Yeah, guidelines that you have to follow, that everyone has to follow in order to make the game fair.
okay. So can anybody, maybe there isn't one, but can anybody think of a game that does not have a system of rules?
So I was actually trying to think that in my head.
There might be. I don't know. Like I said, this first thing is that the bit I figured was sort of the easiest of this whole thing. So so that system of rules of gameplay, that's obviously one of the main things your group is going to have to be working out. I mean, that's essentially the game. Is you know, who does what when and how is it set up and what happens when person A does thing B. So that's obviously one of the main things your group is going to have to address. The main thing that we're going to be looking at next week, because then the week after is Central Spring Break, is sort of tied into the system of rules, is flow charting, is planning out a game by kind of going through what is the cycle of gameplay and what decisions have to be made and who makes those decisions. And that's a good way to kind of visualize, you know, what do you need to put in. Has anybody ever played a game where they've struggled with the rules and the way they've been presented? I see at least one nodding head. Does anybody have an example they want to share that you can think of? Yeah.
I actually tried to play this game. It's called Krill, and it's a card game and I tried to play it with my students, and then I had to like teach the students the rules, and I realized like just how ridiculously complex they were. So I think that like once you get to too many components, where you have to like strategically do certain things with multiple components, it gets a little bit like
Sure.
hairy.
Yeah.
I could say, you know, some people have their own rules, so they make up rules as they go. There's no set rule for that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There is the company is that's not Hasbro. Who does Uno? Uno is trying to see the name on the box. They do it might be Mattel. They have like the official rules for Uno, but that's a good point. There are a lot of games where the rules have become like everybody has their own regional variation of. So, I mean, solitaire is a great example. There's about 10,000 ways to play solitaire. Even if you play sort of the same basic setup for solitaire, even after that, like, well, do you draw one card at a time or do you draw 3 cards at a time? Do you get to cycle through the deck twice? Do you get to cycle through the deck as many times as you want? All those sorts of things. So, one of the things that we're going to have to really take into account, and this will come into the flow charting too, is knowing your audience and then also trying to idiot proof the rules, because that's what I've run into is when I get a game where it's obvious that the person who created the game and wrote the rules knew how to play the game, but they were writing the rules from their own perspective where they just filled in some of the gaps without realizing that somebody new to the game would be going, well, but what happens if this happens or something like that. So your group, when you get into that part of it, it's always better to err on the side of being more specific with your instructions. You may think nobody will ever decide to push this button over here, but you can bet that the minute you put the game down, somebody's going to try to push that button over there and see what happens. So, all right. So I think system of rules is pretty straightforward. So now, what about this next bit, the competing agents? What is that? Like, what does that mean in maybe real world talk? Like,
I think when you play a game, you're either like competing against yourself, or you're kind of competing in a group or on a team. I think agents kind of means like, I don't know, that what kind of group you're in, or whether it's individual or
okay.
so broad.
So we could replace agent with players. Now, what about the article where I grabbed this, which I'm going to put the whole article up in case anyone wants to read it. The person was writing it from sort of a specific standpoint of commentary on single-player online games, and that's where this sort of came up in context. But what about single-player games? Do those still count as games under this definition?
Because are there really rules in a single player? Like if you're playing a video game or something.
We said like solitaire, right?
Right.
Well, no,
So
I'm talking about like a video game for like Xbox or like Xbox One or something.
well, let's take if you're playing solitaire, playing a solitaire card game. Obviously, you're one of the agents. Who are you competing against, or what is the agent you're competing against?
Yourself or the game itself.
Yeah, I think again in this person's context, they would view essentially almost the rules of the game or the setup as being another possible agent in the game. Because in solitaire, what you're playing against is the shuffle of the cards and the order that the cards come up in. So that's the agent you're competing against. So agents can be players in this context, but agents can also be non-playing elements, wherever the competition happens. And what about the compete part? Is that valid as well? You think so? Now, how this is a little ahead. I was going to get to this a little later, but educationally, what is the word compete? How does that?
A winner or a loser?
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, the idea of a winner or a loser. If we're being teachers in a classroom, how do the ideas of winners and losers play out in the context of a classroom?
I think just to be successful in whatever task that you have.
Okay. So if you've got a group of students, and maybe this is just something to be thinking about, But if you've got a group of students who are playing a game and they are each individual players in that game, then if there's got to be competition, then where is the winner and the loser in that competition? In terms, if from a teaching standpoint, where would you want the winner and loser to be sort of placed?
That's like that whole field day, how they've changed in the past. In the past, you've had races where you had the fastest one in fifth grade.
Yeah.
And now they're more cooperative games, like this team will fill up this bucket, or who can,
Yeah,
like
and they're
as a
still
team, we're going to, they're still competing, but.
But in that case, they're competing against what's the other agent?
It could be time, it could be.
Yeah, so this is going to be this is, from my viewpoint at least, this is the place where we have to be the most careful, I think, when we're designing educational games, as opposed to just a game.
I know when I do like cooperative games, like one of the activities is we'll work in a group and there's no like time limit or anything. It's just, can you accomplish the task? That's it. That's what they're competing against. They need to get the ball from this side of the gym to that side of the gym. There's no time limit. Can they do it?
Okay. Yeah, it'd be interesting. This gets into a line, and again, if you have a chance to read the article, he does start to make a distinction between, like, he might not even consider that necessarily a
That
game.
might be an activity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he might consider that more of a puzzle. He
Yeah.
distinguishes between games and puzzles, and one of the big things is that a puzzle, there's one correct ending that you're trying to achieve. And the method of getting there is kind of irrelevant as long as you get there. So if you're doing a crossword puzzle, as long as you get all the words filled in, you have solved the puzzle. And there's not really a competition in that. So if it's a group of students who are trying to achieve a goal and have to figure out how to do that, maybe that's not technically a game, or it's maybe on the fringes of a game.
Yeah.
The fact that I don't know, but that these are the kind of things. Part of this is just to start thinking about this. So when your group starts discussing the specifics of your game, you're maybe making sure that what you're trying to achieve falls within the constraints of a game. Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking of it more like, I would have my kids, they play war, so like with math facts, and whoever's answer is higher, they get to keep the cards or whatever. So at the end, someone will have more cards than the other person, but ultimately for me as a teacher, because I don't really care about who won, it's more about what they're learning, that they're right, exactly,
Mhm.
what they're practicing. So I don't really care about the loser or the winner in that case, just that they were practicing their facts.
Okay. Yeah. So that's.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I feel like games in general are competition based, but when you move to the classroom, it becomes more of a gamification type thing. It's more of a collaborative based type of thing.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
like Steve was talking about with the cooperative games and all that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just gonna say it too, like in terms of in the classroom, as a teacher, you just have to be careful that how you perceive as a teacher the winner. So like in that case, like you're not gratifying whoever the winner is gets it's a free piece of candy, or you get a homework pass, or like you're not giving the winner anything as the instructor, right? You're just using it as a motivational tool.
Mm-hmm.
Which some kids are definitely motivated through competition in order to be involved in it. Like they like that.
Very competitive.
Yeah.
Right.
Even if there is no reward.
Which
they
is-
want
Yeah.
just bragging rights.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
I
has nothing to
actually
do with skill either.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
just
Yeah.
I actually just had my students do posters for learning about marine mammals. And these two kids are both in AP art. And they were like, it's on. They were like going at it. And I was just like, whoa, wait a second.
I have honors
But you
too,
should
and
see
they
their
did the same thing.
posters. They're
Yeah.
amazing.
Wording
So
and
Yeah.
everything.
it was motivation for them. They like brought in their own materials and so the things that I've read about competition is it's a good way to motivate, but it's how you perceive who the winner is. Like you
And they
kind
don't,
of
how you
sometimes
project
they
that,
don't
too.
even care, like
Yeah.
I'll say, okay, whoever gets most points gets
5 points on the next test, and the other team will get 3. And they're good, like they're like it could be 1 point, like as long as it's like they don't, they don't even.
I'll do an activity in PE, and my younger kids, it's tough because they do get so competitive. And I'll say, all right, if you get 1 ball, you did good. If you got 2, you did great. If you did 3, you did excellent. And then it seems to work, but then they'll leave class and they'll go up to every other. Because they want to know. They want to know how they compare to the rest of them.
Yeah. So I think that the point that is an excellent one of a game is by definition going to have some kind of a winner and a loser. So in thinking about that process and the educational aspect is to not make that the goal. Like you're saying, is to de-emphasize that aspect of it and to try not make that the educational goal. The educational goal shouldn't be who was the first team to get to this, but rather, what was done along the way. So a lot of times, whereas like playing life, say, the bottom line is you want to end up with the most money and that's what counts. Whereas in an educational game, it might be more, doesn't really matter where it ended up. Yes, there will be somebody who ended up with more points or more this or more that. But what they did along the way, that's the more critical component of it. Your hand was up. I didn't know if you had a.
I won't say it anymore because I think that's what I do in my classroom. Like you're talking about gamifying something. So like with math, everything I guess by definition would be a puzzle. And I'm trying to turn all the puzzles into a game to try to make it more engaging because my students think my class is horribly boring. So like one thing I do with equation solving for my 8th graders is I make it a relay race. But that would be going against what you're just saying because there is a reward for I do 2 rewards. One, the team who completed the equation the fastest, quickest, and one for one that they have to go up and draw a picture as they get each equation right, and one for the most creative drawing at the end. So like keeps the other teams in it.
Yeah.
So if they don't win the quickest,
they're still going for.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there you're addressing that issue too. That there's still a goal for everybody, regardless of where they ended up. There's an accomplishment at the end of it.
So would that be like gamifying? Like taking equations is not a game, but then if you make it.
Yeah, well, I think that's going to come down then to the last piece of this too, because that's where he made the author of the article made the biggest distinctions between puzzles and games. Is with this last thing, which is ambiguous decisions. So what does that sound like it means?
There's many different ways to get one answer.
Okay, many different ways to get one answer.
Think about one of those. You remember those books you had where you could choose your own ending? So it's never clear, and you never know where it's going. So it's ambiguous, but it's your decision on the path you're going to take. I don't understand what I was trying to say. Like, are we not picking up? It's not how you get to the answer. It's
Okay, well not how we get to the answer, but so what?
Is this in like the broad spectrum of just games, or are we thinking about this in
He's-
an educational sense?
He's defining, this is a general definition for what he considers to be a game.
So would that be like rolling a dice? You're not really making
Okay.
decisions being made for you?
Okay, yeah, that might be something that's ambiguous.
I'm thinking of this in like more of a sports in a way. So in any game or collaborative activity, there's always one goal. So in sports, like football, whatever, there's different positions. So each person is making a different decision, all to reach that one goal.
Okay. Yeah, now, again, he also makes the distinction between contests and games. And from his perspective, I think a lot of what we would call sports games, he views as more as contests, which is simply how well can you do a certain skill. So he uses the example, I think, of like weightlifting. In weightlifting, it's not really a game, it's simply how well you can do this thing. Or even like he points out Guitar Hero, Anybody's played Guitar Hero? Everyone considers that a game, and yet there's no real decision making on the part of the player. You're supposed to push the button that corresponds with the thing on the screen at the right time. And so it's more of just developing a skill, like the person who can do that thing the best, but the player's not really having to make any choices along the way. So in that case, he considers that to be a contest where it's a display of skill, but not something that is where the player is really having to make decisions along the way. Yeah, I mean, what else revolved around that? I sort of got myself off track there. I think one of the points is just that for a game to be a game, the outcome or the goal sort of can't be predetermined. There, at each step along the way, there shouldn't just be a thing that the player has to do, right? That they can make a choice at any point to make a meaningful decision that will alter the course of the rest of the game from that point on, as opposed to just hitting a checkpoint and then moving on to the next thing. That there are things where they're actually having to think and make a decision about something that affects the outcome. Yeah.
But you're doing that with incomplete information.
There we go. Yeah, that's good. So you don't know that the choice you make. That's you don't.
It's a roll of the dice. It's a chance card. It's a
right.
You know,
or when you
how
make.
many clues do you have in your focus?
Yeah, when you make the decision, you don't know that decision is necessarily the best one. You may discover later on that a different decision would have been better, as opposed to a situation where there is one correct thing and you just need to know which correct thing to make. He goes on about in video games, he thinks one of the worst things is the save game option, because what people do is they play a game, they get to a point where they have to make a decision, they save the game, they make a decision. If it was the wrong one, they back up to the saved game and they make the other decision, and then go on like that. Like that sort of defeats the whole purpose of it. So the idea, I guess, is that you're making a decision off of incomplete information that you're not necessarily sure is going to be the best route to go, but you have to make a decision in order for the game to progress.
So, all along the way here, I'm thinking of, okay, so where in his definition, I feel like it's lacking the term objective, like to meet an objective. Like, I feel like that it should be like added at the end, like to meet an objective.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because like you have to have a point to play the game. If you don't, and the rules aren't the point to play the game. The agents aren't the point to play the game. The decisions are how to hopefully get to the purpose.
Yeah.
So like I feel like he doesn't have the objective.
System of rules would have an end game or an outcome
or the
But they're not the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
They're not the how to play. It's the why. How and why are different. I don't know. In my brain, they're different.
No, and I can see that. He would probably use the word compete to imply the fact that there's a point where
that's why I was wondering
the competition
what part
is.
Would that fall in?
Yeah. From his perspective, he might be thinking if there's a competition, there's a point at which somebody has achieved the objective and the others haven't, and that's sort of built into the idea of a competition. If there's no end game, then it's not really a competition. It's just two forces butting heads. So, but yeah, I can see that just clarifying that either through the rules or through the competition, that there's a clearly defined
as you make your
endpoint.
That
That you're
Back when we were talking about Uno, there is a set of rules for that, but as it branches off, and people can make their own rules, which goes off of the ambiguous decisions, not knowing that those new rules can alter the whole game.
Yeah, I'm sure some of you have, but the game Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So the game Sorry, when I was growing up, was pretty straightforward. You drew the cards, you moved your pieces, you followed the instructions. The newest version of it, they've added two elements to the game. there's an ice ring and there's a fire ring, which are these little things you can put on one of your pieces, and they're built into the card. So it'll say like, take ice, add ice to player and then do this. And the idea, the ice protects that player, so that piece can't be sent back to home or can't be kicked out of the way or anything like that. It basically protects it. And the fire, at the beginning of each turn, the piece with the fire on it can move to the next corner immediately and then go from there. And what's been interesting to see is I remember games of Sorry where basically at the end of the game, one person was done and there would be one or two people who still had 3 of their pieces sitting in home. And it doesn't seem to happen anymore. So the designers of the game figured out that by altering those 2 rules, it somehow statistically sort of leveled the playing field. So when we play now as our family, at the end of the game, at that point, usually most people have most of their players in the end area, and it's a lot closer competition. I'm curious to at some point find out what made them decide that adding those 2 little features to the game would probably in the end make the game more interesting, because then you don't have people that are, it's not a blowout, it's a much closer competition.
I think we should email the director of the Avengers, let him know the end game isn't really the game.
Right. Yeah.
Email the definition.
So, yeah. The other thing, sorry, this is a little tangent, but for anyone who's seen any of the Harry Potter movies and you're a teacher, is anyone else completely bugged by the whole point system and the houses? How the houses get points assigned to them for various things, and then the headmaster at the end of the school year suddenly says, oh, but by the way, I'm going to give this house 20 points for this and 10 points for that and 50 points for that. So look at that. They're now the winner. From a game's standpoint, that seems a rather ambiguous decision, I guess. I don't know. Sorry, that's just something that's been stuck in my craw. All right, so aside from maybe an addition or a clarification for something related to an outcome or a goal or something you're trying to achieve or something that determines the end of the game, does this seem relatively workable then in terms of something to work off?
Yeah.
I mean, if you go online, you'll probably find 50,000 other opinions that are slightly different than this. But what I liked about this was that it does seem to be pretty clear-cut. It lays out really 3 major areas to be thinking about, which works well as we're creating the game, because you're going to be, in fact, tonight, you're going to be starting to talk about this as you're doing your analysis of your audience. So who are the agents going to be? Is it a group game? Is it an individual game? Is it a solo game? So we're going to be addressing that. The system of rules is obviously, that's going to be the big nut to crack, because that's essentially the game. So figuring out what those rules are. And then, again, keeping this in mind, because I do think that last point is important. If it's simply knowing which correct answer to say at each point along the way, I don't know that necessarily constitutes a game. There has to be meaningful interaction on the part of the students in terms of really making a decision about something. So that's going to be something to keep in mind. I mean, I guess that kind of goes along with, from an educational standpoint, the whole, it'd be better to go deeper than wider. Like, make them think about something and then see the consequences of that choice, as opposed to simply kind of running them through a bunch of exercises where there's really not a real meaningful decision that needs to be made. All right, so let's do this, because we've been at it for a little over an hour now, and I want to get into some game work. I want to give you guys a good 45 minutes or so tonight to get with your groups and to do some discussion. So why don't we take like a 15-ish minute break or so now. Let's say come back, I can't do math right now, like 6:25-ish, somewhere in that range. I think that's roughly about 15, 17 minutes or so. 6:25-ish or so. We'll just wrap this up a little bit, and then I'll explain what I want you guys to do next in your groups, and we'll go from there. All right? So take a break.
I am. I share what I ate before.